Hello, you beautiful manifesting souls, and welcome to the Space and Time. My name is Gabriel Lugo, and here I talk from self to self. Let's continue today with this mini-series that I have on manifesting. Let's talk about these intricate mechanics of what manifesting really is, in direct contrast to what we know, say, superficially on the metaphysics involved and the law of attraction and all of this, which is really another iteration of the teaching that we are on the way to understanding the self, of realizing the self. And so manifestation has to obey that return to source. And so far we have covered the, let's say, principles of what really is happening between matter and mind, and the apparent manifestation of things, synchronicities, and so on. And in this part, as the channeling goes on, Quo seeks to explain how these mechanics are intertwined between all of us and the formation of the social memory complex. So we're going to get into all of that. Just as a reminder, this is a channeling from October 6th, 2021. Very recent. As this podcast is coming out, it's not even a year old. So again, you can go check this on LNL Research. Just search for conscious channeling, or if you're listening on YouTube, you can just check the description and go read the channeling whole completely. So without further ado, last time we were on this channeling, we were reading the channeling from Austin. If you remember, it started with Jim, then it continued with Austin. Now we're going to Trish, or Kathy as it says here. I'm not sure if that is her name, but I know Trish is Gary Bean's wife. And so it goes to Trish. That's at least what Quo says last time. And they say, "We are those of Quo, and we are with this instrument. We have been speaking on the topic of thoughts as things, thoughts becoming or seeming to become things, and thoughts as part of a greater consciousness that is collective. That is the beginning of the forming of a social memory complex upon your planet. Indeed, the concept of thought concerning oneself or entity or many entities can be seen as the building blocks, in a very basic way, of what will become your social memory complex. Thoughts that are part of a greater consciousness and share among the collective group of selves upon your planet are the beginnings of the connections that are made on the mind and spirit level." I have a visualization for you to keep in mind as we read this. And again, this is my interpretation, my view of how all of this ties in together. And so you don't have to see it this way, but for the purpose of illustration, I want you to visualize this. If you can improve it, great. This is just the image that I got as I read, understood, and made coherence out of what I was reading. So, you see, we have to start with the understanding that we humans are not independent entities. Yet we have a seeming manifestation, which is the body and the individual mind. We have, as it were, enclosed in ourselves a thinking mind. But this thinking mind is not separate from the environment. We have seen this, and we have covered the part of how synchronicities play a role into showing us that indeed there is something beyond ourselves that manifests outside of our minds, and it's linked to it. Experientially, we can check this by looking at synchronicities and specific events, deja vus, if you will, too. All of these tie in together the falsehood of time and space. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because as we admit and understand that we are simple instruments of a moving ocean, we are a sort of channel in which the currents of the ocean move, then the inevitable movement or cause of this movement of the ocean, which is consciousness, as it moves through us, we perceive it as thoughts, we perceive them as visions, we perceive them as images. And all of this starts taking form. Now you see, what is the movement of consciousness as we know it in the philosophy of the law of one? Well, we are in evolution. We call this evolution, although I would rather call it return to source. I know it sounds a little new agey, but this is the return to the self. And this is why I mentioned at the beginning that we have to always consider unity as the source of everything. And if we are fragmented, which we are, this is a simple recognition of our present experience, we see that we are fragmented. We seem to be fragmented into separate selves, other selves. And so all of this fragmentation actually shows us that we are at the peak of separation. So the return to source is the return to unity. The path to return to unity is the understanding and revealing of the self. So as we go through this process, then consciousness, and it's not we as independent agents of this reality, of this world, of this universe, we are simple instruments, channels. The mind-body-spirit complex is a simple channel of what we call metaphysical energy or intelligent energy, which is moving through the energy system, the energy centers. And so all these distortions and healing, and it's interesting when Ra calls it what you call healing, because they see it differently. And to my understanding, to my view, what they see is the simple unkinking of the hoses, let's put it that way, of the energy centers. You know, these blockages are simply blockages of intelligent energy flowing through. And so as you heal, you allow more of these energies to go through. Now bear with me, because all of this is going to make sense with the channeling that I'm reading to you. So far we have that we, what we call we, localizations of consciousness, which is really what we are instruments for the perception of the evolution of consciousness. Now all of this happens as thoughts. You see, so far we are in a transition between third density, or the human level of thinking, the ego self, going into a more unified sense of being, which is fourth density, where the energies of love and understanding start flowing through us. This is the time-space fourth density transition that has already occurred. This is what's causing cancer, war, all this final chaos in the last times of third density. But you see, all this fourth density, what is also bringing to those who are sensitive to it is the sense of unity. But it is met with resistance by the third density thinking mind. And this generates the friction, the resistance that we see in the world. And so the energies that are moving, which is simply consciousness moving into a more unified sense of beingness, all of this is also flowing through us as thoughts. So these thoughts, this is why you see that Quo says that while there seems to be a manifestation happening from our thinking, it's only because that which needs to manifest is also sensed by the mind, the thinking mind. This is a beautiful process, because this is how we start to see that there is no distinction between mind and matter. We, as conscious beings, have the equipment, if you will, which is the brain, which senses the material realm, and the mind, which perceives the etheric realm. And the combination of these perceptions actually see that that which I am thinking is manifesting. I mean, this has been the case throughout the whole third density, but now we're becoming a lot more sensitive to this, and we're seeing it more, especially if you're on the path of self-realization, because that is the motive for all of this. So again, just to recap this visualization, we are instruments that perceive the changes in consciousness, and whether our tuning is more into 3D or 4D, just to use terms associated with Law of One philosophy, then we will see those things manifested or not. We will find resistance into that which is inevitably occurring. Call it ascension, call it harvest, call it what you will. It is the movement of consciousness into a more unified sense of being. You see? So that's what we're seeing as manifestation. And when people tell you, you need to vibrate at a higher level to manifest, it is true, but not from an ego perspective. Rather from the conscious being that you are, that is realizing that all of this is actually true. All this movement into a higher consciousness. The whole materialistic view of the world is falling apart. The economic system that we're into, which is only the exacerbation of negative polarization to the degree in which they took it, that's all falling apart too. The last remnants of this control system is also falling apart. So we see this as chaos and friction and uncertainty and so on. That's all right. But everything else is manifesting as well. To the contrary, or to the opposite, there is also the manifestation of more beings being conscious of reality. And they're more open about their own experiences and how they feel, and all these emotional waterfalls of humanity are now pouring out. So this is the process. Now, I'll go read more of this so it starts to make more sense as what I explained, but as usual, I kind of like to go into these tangents to explain my way of seeing things, so you can probably be on the same rail with me. And now hopefully it makes more sense, so I'll keep making comments. They continue saying, it's actually a question what they say. What do you call, a rhetorical question, what do you call existence upon your planet? Such connections between and among selves do form, do extend and reach out like beacons of light across the population of the third density selves, creating a community of thought. Indeed, this greater consciousness of which we are speaking is one important aspect of the idea of thought creating a new reality upon your planet. The power behind the thought grows as it is shared among the community, and as the thoughts harmonize due to the shared feeling among the selves for that thought to grow in a certain way, a spirit of the cultivation of positive and productive thought grows as well. This is indeed a foundation of the growth of a social memory complex. So in very few words, what they're saying is that yes, once we start to harmonize our thoughts, which is simply, okay, what do you want? Do you want a unified world, or do you want a separate one? As this starts to happen, we start growing as a social memory complex. Now, what is a social memory complex? It is simply the accumulation of mind, body, spirit complexes, instruments, humans, thinking in the same way, not as a hive mind, but in the direction of seeking. Let me put it that way, not thinking the same way, but in the same direction of seeking. That direction of seeking, when it's positive, is in the search for unity, in the seeking of the self, because the self is a unified self. So the seeking of the self is in and of itself the seeking of unity. Now, I think that's the key word when they say, as the thoughts harmonize due to the shared feeling among the selves for that thought to grow in a certain way, that would be the thought of obviously becoming one with each other, sharing, which is something that we haven't experienced to a great extent in planet Earth. The spirit of the cultivation of positive and productive thought grows as well. This is the manifestation of things. And so this is the foundation of the growth of a social memory complex. So we're all growing into this consciousness. And another thing that is important to mention, if you haven't listened to the previous podcast, is that they acknowledge that there is no independent self, that there is only the self. And what we experience is a finite portion, that localization of the one self, exploring this reality that has been created by the logos and evolving. Again, the evolution is on the path of unity. Even the negatives are going in the path of unity. It's just that they don't know it, or they ignore it. So they continue saying, regarding the notion of a thought becoming or translating into a crystallized thing, of which we have spoken here this evening, there is an understanding that a thought in its mental and emotional state is made of energy, an energy projecting from and remaining a part of the self which produces it, which is also made of spiritual energy, if you will. The energy that makes up each individual's field, auric field, personal field, is generated by the mind's body-spirit complex in all its constituent parts. The energy centers constitute the basis of the frequencies and tones that make up each individual and color the thoughts that are produced by the individual. Some may be more feeling thoughts, such as love or hope, and some may be more mental thoughts that are more constructs. Each type of thought does indeed, if persisted in, become more and more crystallized over what you call time in each individual's experience. And collectively, this can be shared across selves in the community of consciousness of which we spoke earlier. In this paragraph, you can see how our own individual thoughts, when they're harmonized between the self, you see, this is why it's so important to really polarize the self. Let's talk about polarization here, shall we? You see, let's start with the new, I shouldn't even call it neutral, but the indifferent one. The indifferent self has conflict. The majority of the planets are in this process of not deciding their path. They're not sure if they should be positive or they should be negative because of social conditioning, at the very least. It's a huge influence in which we are here on planet Earth. The suicidal cases are just insane, and the successful suicides are also a testament of this. But just the suicidal thoughts that exist just speaks of this this lack of view, of perception, of the ability to make choices. So we have this, the real pandemic should be this depressive and anxious self that exists out there, and that we should be paying attention to, because this is our self. We are in this state, all collectively together. So this is the indifferent self. I'm speaking of the exaggerated, of course, exacerbated, separate or separation self, manifested separate self, intensified, which is the depressed feeling, the anxious, and eventually the suicidal thoughts, and so all of this. So this, but the vast majority are in a very, let's say, disturbed state. So these are the indifferent ones. Now there is the positive ones who, once they polarize, the difference between the positive and the indifferent ones is that the ones that are polarizing positively, they're facing all of those fears. they're facing all of their anxieties, depressions, and all their mud and their dirt that is still inside. And so we go through this process that we call the dark night of the soul. You see, and people may say, "Oh, I've been through 20 dark night of the souls and so on." Great. That's cleansing you from all your own perceptions that you're a separate being. You're becoming a more purified channel for the energies that are being manifested here. So, welcome. And so this is the positive path. Those who have polarized enough positively, they become beacons of this light to shine on all others. Now the negatives are absorbing this light, you see, but they're still polarizing because they have their own path. This is the path of recognizing the God self within itself in an abstract form of saying, "I am God. You should all bow to me." But the path is still a valid one, which is the one that creates out of this energy, this intelligent energy that is being channeled through the negative entity. But in both cases, positive and negatives, the energy is flowing unimpeded, or should I say, is flowing much more unimpeded. In this process, what we have is that those real, true energies, which we can call time-space energies for density, are flowing through the selves and being projected in reality. As you project this true reality outside of you, then you begin to manifest it. Because it's not you as if you had power, you are simply a channel of this energy that is being projected outside. And you see it. One of the key things of the positive being is that it doesn't have an ego. I'm not saying that, this is a point of contention for vocabulary when we talk about ego, but it doesn't have a sense of self that is aggrandized by the things that it does, or by the thing that it acquires, but simply it rejoices on all things that are manifested, including the negative ones. So you see, the positive self simply rejoices on that. And, there is not this, man, I gotta get into this law of attraction because I'm going to attract the boyfriend or girlfriend that I want, or man, I'm going to get the house of my dreams, and so on. This may be part of the whole manifestation of 4 density. That may be true. But trying to prostitute the energy, intelligent energy, and to do what the ego wants, that's probably not the real deal. Alright, so they go on and say, these various types of thoughts have their own energy, their own frequency, and therefore, from things that reflect that particular type of energy from which they were produced. These things can come in the form of events, actual items found, created, or manufactured, or other creations of, one could say, of an infinite nature. For thought is infinite, and each entity can realize all things are possible through thought. Again, knowing the thought of whatever type is made of a pure form of energy helps to understand that all things are indeed possible, for energy is infinite and malleable, creative, and of what you may even call a blessed nature, given that it is from the one infinite creator. So this is where I say that all things, of course, are possible, but when it's not guided by the ego, you have no expectations, and whatever is created, that is perfect. When you have expectations, then that of course can become disappointing. But you will never be disappointed if what you do is simply what you have to do, what you believe is right to do. And you have no investment in the outcome. So all things are possible. And this is why a lot of people are manifesting even within, and this is a very important point, that a lot of people are manifesting, say, the businesses of their dreams, or they're manifesting the life of their dreams, because all of this was a pure thought that was arising from the self but suppressed by other thoughts that were there in the past. So they're now manifesting all of this because that's what they really wanted it to do. So it's so obvious that we all simply need to do what we want to do, and it will happen. You have to go through, of course, what we call the dark night of the souls, which is giving up all those things that you don't need for what you're going to manifest. Because you, as a co-creator, have the ability of manifesting your dreams out here, but you have to discern. And this is a process of the cleansing that I talked about, if it's your ego that really wants it, or if it's you. Which is not really you as an independent agent of this reality, but the you, that is flowing, that has always been there. The child that always wanted certain things and that still enjoys them. So there's so much to talk about here, but you can see this is really, it's not that you are empty, you're an empty channel, and all things that are happening, you have not even the slightest idea of what's happening. You know exactly what's happening inside you. And the way in which you gauge this is the love and harmony that you see inside you, that you feel inside you. And I'm going to get to this because this is the most beautiful part of this episode. Quo finishes and says, "We would give a final thought through this instrument, speaking to the questionnaires' example of the thought of hope, and say indeed that hope begins in the hearts of all entities as an energy born out of the great original thought of love from which all things come. Hope is a pure form of thought, an ideal similar to the thought called joy, or love, or peace. And we say, indeed, the more the shared community of selves begin to focus their thoughts, their energies, upon such high ideals, the more the greater consciousness of the planet shall be advanced into the higher frequencies, which shall yield more of the same, and a higher form of physical, crystallized creations as well." You see, this touches on a most important point. I think it's beautiful to wrap up this episode because it's saying, let's go little by little. The beginning of this channeling gave an example of hope. Hope is a thought, but it's not hope itself. But hope is a pure form of thought, as they say. And this hope is always arising from the sensation of separation. You see, as a separate self, you begin, this is why hope is like the guiding star, because it lends the moth to the flame, the moth being the separate self, dissolving itself, burning itself as it gets closer, attracted by this hope. And the hope is whatever it is in your heart that you hope for yourself. That hope brings you closer to your true self. And the reason why I find this the most beautiful way to end this episode is because they call it that is an ideal hope. The thought of hope is an ideal similar to the thought called joy, love, or peace. You see, these three words are the ones that I use to define presence of, let's say, the Creator. The presence of the Creator. I have no other way of saying it. The presence of pure consciousness. What do I mean by this? When the mind is not active, we have this strange feeling that we are present. Now, there is no mind. There is a sort of calm, fluid energy around us. You can call this contemplation. Call it meditation too. I believe contemplation is a better word that gets closer to what we really feel. Now, this essence of contemplation is really who we are. This is the true self. This is the feeling of the self. What we call unconditional love. That's what's pouring out of ourselves. our true selves, not the independent self, not the mind-body-spirit complex, none of that. The pure self is a sea of joy, love, and peace. This is why thought is that beacon of light that calls, that flame that attracts the moth. And as we dissolve in this peace, this joy, this love, then we begin to see that that's what we truly are. So, hope is only a guiding star. But what we know and feel through hope, what we hope to achieve, it's the current state of which we all are, which is pure presence, no thoughts, just movement. If you can stay there long enough, that's what's called samadhi. The consciousness of your own presence. Being aware of being aware. And this is the highest form of meditation. This is what's causing everything to precipitate in our planet. The more we are conscious of our own being. Self-realization, as I call it. And I will take this opportunity to mention that my course, which is based on the direct path, talks about this specifically, because this is the realization of knowing your true essence. This is actually module 5 in my course, where I talked about that which we have discovered so far in the previous modules, which is pure consciousness, is the source of our joy, happiness, love, and peace, harmony. It's the same feeling. It's only that we cut it out into different contrasts, because we only know of love by fear, hate, and so on. We know peace in direct contrast to conflict, joy in contrast to sadness, depression, and so on. But this is a dualistic view of the essence of who we are. The essence of who we are is something much more subtle, and it contains all of this. You cannot differentiate love, peace, happiness within this realization of the self. So this course, of course, is available in the description of YouTube. I would love for you to take it. I would love for people to take a trip into their own selves, which is really what I attempt to do. There's no metaphysics involved, no esoteric knowledge. You don't require any spiritual practice. You don't need to do anything, just your experience. It's that simple that we cannot sometimes process it and say, no, my mind wants something else. But I guarantee you, this is the key to everything. I wish more people could do it. So that's why I have a very symbolic price for this course. Go check it out if you're interested. At this point, Quo says, "Weirdos of Quo, we have been with this instrument and we now transfer this contact to the one known as Gary." So next time we're going to get into Gary's channeling. But I am Gabe and I am going to leave you now. We transfer this contact to you, to my other self. I thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. I thank you again, and I'll catch you on the next one.